The update came in quietly at first, just another alert buried among countless headlines, but within minutes it began to spread. What had once been a confusing case was now taking a new direction, and investigators were finally ready to reveal what they had found. The name at the center of it all, Nancy Guthrie, was once again dominating conversations, but this time it was because of something far more serious. Authorities confirmed that new autopsy evidence had been uncovered, evidence that had not been fully understood during the initial investigation. This discovery changed everything. What once seemed uncertain was now being re-examined under a sharper lens, and every detail from the past was suddenly important again. The case, which had left many questions unanswered, was now reopening in a way no one expected. Investigators began revisiting old reports, statements, and timelines, looking for anything that might connect with the new findings. It was clear that something had been missed before, and now they were determined to uncover the truth. As the news spread, public attention quickly followed. People who had once moved on from the story were now drawn back in, eager to understand what this new evidence meant. If you're following this case and want to stay updated on every development, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. But what made this update even more unsettling was not just the discovery itself. It was what it suggested. The autopsy results pointed to details that did not match earlier assumptions, raising serious questions about what truly happened. Because sometimes the truth doesn't disappear, it waits, hidden in the evidence until the right moment to be revealed. As the new findings began to circulate, investigators moved quickly to reassess everything they thought they knew about the case. The autopsy results were no longer just a report filed away. They had become the key to understanding what may have truly happened. Details that once seemed minor were now being examined with renewed focus, and every inconsistency was being questioned. Detectives returned to the original timeline, carefully comparing it with the newly uncovered evidence. They noticed that certain assumptions made early in the investigation no longer aligned with what the autopsy suggested. This created a gap, one that needed to be explained. What had been accepted before was now being challenged, and that shift brought a new level of urgency to the case. Forensic specialists were brought back in to review the findings, ensuring that nothing had been overlooked. They analyzed the results in depth, looking for indicators that could point to a clearer cause and sequence of events. Each detail mattered, and as they worked through the evidence, a different picture began to form, one that raised even more questions than answers. At the same time, investigators began re-interviewing individuals connected to the case. Statements that once seemed consistent were now being compared against the updated findings. Even small contradictions became significant as detectives worked to determine whether something had been missed or intentionally hidden. Public attention intensified as word of the new evidence spread. People who had followed the case from the beginning were now revisiting every detail, trying to understand what this meant. If you're following this developing story and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators dug deeper into the autopsy findings, they were beginning to uncover connections that suggested the truth may have been hidden in plain sight all along. As investigators dug deeper into the revised findings, the focus shifted toward reconstructing the final hours with greater precision. The autopsy results had introduced new questions, and now detectives needed to align those findings with the timeline that had originally been accepted. What once seemed like a straightforward sequence of events was beginning to show cracks. They revisited every recorded detail, phone activity, witness statements, and movements leading up to the incident. When these elements were placed side by side with the updated forensic conclusions, certain moments no longer made sense. Gaps appeared where there had once been certainty, and those gaps demanded answers. One of the most significant developments came from reanalyzing the estimated time of death. The new interpretation suggested a different window than initially believed. This single adjustment had a ripple effect, forcing investigators to question alibis and timelines that had previously gone unchallenged. People who were once considered uninvolved were now being looked at more closely. At the same time, forensic experts examined physical evidence again, this time guided by the updated autopsy insights. Subtle details that were overlooked before now carried greater importance. Patterns, traces, and conditions that didn't fully align with the original conclusions began to stand out more clearly. Detectives also revisited locations connected to the case, searching for anything that might support the new direction of the investigation. Even though time had passed, they knew that overlooked evidence can sometimes remain hidden in plain sight. As the case took this unexpected turn, public interest grew even stronger. If you're following this story and want to stay updated as new details emerge, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as the timeline continued to shift under the weight of new evidence, investigators were beginning to realize that someone's version of events might not hold up much longer. As the investigation continued to evolve, detectives began focusing on the inconsistencies that had emerged from the revised timeline. What once appeared to be minor discrepancies were now being treated as critical leads. The new autopsy findings had shifted the foundation of the case, and with that shift came a need to question everything that had previously been accepted as fact. Investigators started comparing earlier statements with the updated timeline, carefully examining where details no longer aligned. In some cases, individuals had placed themselves in specific locations at certain times, but those claims were now being challenged by the new forensic window. This created tension within the investigation, as detectives worked to determine whether these inconsistencies were honest mistakes or something more deliberate. At the same time, attention turned toward digital evidence. Phone records, location data, and communication logs were reanalyzed with greater scrutiny. These pieces of information often provide an objective timeline, and when compared with personal statements, they can reveal gaps that are otherwise difficult to detect. In this case, those comparisons began to highlight differences that could not be easily explained. Forensic teams also revisited physical evidence collected early in the case. With the updated autopsy insights, they were able to interpret certain findings in a new way. Details that once seemed insignificant now contributed to a clearer understanding of what may have happened. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the evolving picture. The investigation was no longer about confirming what was already believed. It was about uncovering what had been missed. As more updates surfaced, public attention remained high. If you're following this case and want to stay informed, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators connected these inconsistencies, they were getting closer to identifying the moment where the truth began to break through. As the investigation continued to evolve, detectives began focusing on the inconsistencies that had emerged from the revised timeline. What once appeared to be minor discrepancies were now being treated as critical leads. The new autopsy findings had shifted the foundation of the case, and with that shift came a need to question everything that had previously been accepted as fact. Investigators started comparing earlier statements with the updated timeline, carefully examining where details no longer aligned. In some cases, individuals had placed themselves in specific locations at certain times, but those claims were now being challenged by the new forensic window. This created tension within the investigation, as detectives worked to determine whether these inconsistencies were honest mistakes or something more deliberate. At the same time, attention turned toward digital evidence. Phone records, location data, and communication logs were reanalyzed with greater scrutiny. These pieces of information often provide an objective timeline, and when compared with personal statements, they can reveal gaps that are otherwise difficult to detect. In this case, those comparisons began to highlight differences that could not be easily explained. Forensic teams also revisited physical evidence collected early in the case. With the updated autopsy insights, they were able to interpret certain findings in a new way. Details that once seemed insignificant now contributed to a clearer understanding of what may have happened. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the evolving picture. The investigation was no longer about confirming what was already believed. It was about uncovering what had been missed. As more updates surfaced, public attention remained high. If you're following this case and want to stay informed, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as investigators connected these inconsistencies, they were getting closer to identifying the moment where the truth began to break through. As the investigation pressed forward, the focus turned to a critical phase, linking the emerging inconsistencies to a clear and provable sequence of events. Detectives were no longer just identifying gaps. They were working to connect those gaps into a narrative that explained what had truly happened. The updated autopsy findings continued to guide this process, acting as a reference point against which all other evidence was measured. One of the most significant developments came from the re-examination of physical evidence collected early in the case. Items that had once been processed and stored were now being reviewed with fresh perspective. Forensic teams applied updated techniques and compared results against the revised timeline. In doing so, they began to uncover details that had previously gone unnoticed, subtle traces that now carried major importance. At the same time, investigators deepened their analysis of digital records. Patterns of communication, sudden gaps in activity, and location data were all mapped out with precision. When these digital footprints were aligned with the new forensic conclusions, they began to point toward a more focused direction. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were forming a clearer picture. Detectives also intensified interviews, returning to individuals whose earlier statements no longer fit the emerging timeline. Under closer questioning, certain details began to shift. What had once been confident accounts now appeared uncertain, and in some cases, contradictory. These changes raised further questions about what had been known and what may have been concealed. Public attention continued to build as the case developed. If you're following this investigation and want to stay updated, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because as the evidence began to align more clearly than ever before, investigators were approaching a breakthrough, one that could finally reveal the truth behind everything that had been hidden. As the investigation moved closer to a breakthrough, detectives began focusing on the strongest connections between the new autopsy findings and the evidence they had gathered. What had once been a collection of separate details was now forming a consistent pattern. Each piece, physical evidence,
intel, and we have investigators on the other side of these calls basically that are combing through the thousands of tips that are being received in this center. There has been a few times where we feel that somebody needs to look at this tip, somebody needs to look at this lead immediately. So we will call the appropriate investigators to say, hey, this information was put into the call, but we need somebody to look at this immediately.
The Sheriff's Department also providing an update on clues in the investigation, writing, quote, the only item that has been positively identified is the Ozark backpack. Investigators are working to determine where the other items may have been purchased. Former Pinal County, Arizona Sheriff Mark Lamb joins me now. Sheriff Lamb, thank you so much for joining us. So we now know officially that investigators are looking at more than one person being involved in this case, which echoes what FBI Director Kash Patel had previously said when he used the phrase persons of interest. So how significant is this detail to you?
Well, Carly, I think that there's been an accomplice all the way along, whether it was somebody that gave inside information as to where she would be, where the cameras were on the house. These are tough crimes to pull off by yourself, a one-person thing. I firmly believe that there's been an accomplice all along. And that's going to make it, I think, a little bit easier eventually to find some resolution to this case, especially
If you've been following this story and want to stay informed, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Because with the evidence now aligning and the pressure intensifying, investigators were on the verge of uncovering the truth, one that would soon bring clarity to a case that had remained unresolved for far too long. As the investigation reached its most critical point, the pressure that had been building finally led to a decisive shift. Detectives now had a clear, evidence-backed timeline, and the inconsistencies they had uncovered could no longer be explained away. What had once been uncertainty was now turning into confirmation, and investigators were ready to act on everything they had gathered. Interviews intensified, with detectives presenting the updated findings directly to those connected to the case. This time, the questions were precise, supported by forensic evidence and verified timelines. The responses began to change. Where there had once been confidence, there was now hesitation. Details that had previously been consistent started to unravel under scrutiny. At the same time, investigators executed targeted searches in locations that had become significant based on the new evidence. These operations were carefully planned, ensuring that any additional findings would be properly documented and preserved. What they discovered during these searches added further weight to the case, reinforcing the conclusions that had already been forming. The turning point came when the evidence and the shifting statements aligned in a way that could no longer be ignored. Investigators were able to establish a clear sequence of events, one that explained not only what had happened, but also how it had been concealed. The truth, which had remained hidden for so long, was now fully within reach. Public attention surged as news of these developments spread. Many who had followed the case from the beginning recognized that this was the moment everything was changing. If you've been keeping up with this story, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more true crime updates. Because with the truth now emerging, the case was about to enter its final stage, where everything uncovered would lead to a definitive conclusion. As the case entered its final stage, everything investigators had uncovered was brought together into a clear and complete picture. The new autopsy findings, once just a detail buried in reports, had become the foundation of the entire investigation. Every piece of evidence, physical, digital, and testimonial, now aligned with a single, undeniable sequence of events. Authorities moved forward with formal action, presenting the case with confidence built on months of careful work. The inconsistencies that once clouded the truth had been replaced by a timeline that was precise and supported by forensic proof. What had remained hidden for so long was now fully exposed. In the courtroom, the evidence spoke louder than anything else. Each detail reinforced the next, leaving little room for doubt. The revised understanding of what had happened changed the direction of the case completely, proving that the initial assumptions had been incomplete. It was a powerful reminder of how critical thorough investigation and reevaluation can be in uncovering the truth. For those who had followed the case from the beginning, this moment brought a sense of closure. While the events themselves could never be undone, the outcome provided answers that had been missing for so long. The truth, once uncertain, was now clear. Beyond the legal conclusion, the case left a lasting impact. It highlighted the importance of evidence, the value of persistence, and the reality that even the smallest overlooked detail can change everything. If you followed this story from beginning to end, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories. Because in the end, it wasn't just the discovery of new evidence that solved the case. It was the determination to question everything until the truth finally came to light.